The sound of rotor blades cutting through the desert air had always been Sarah Mitchell's favorite symphony. Growing up near Fort Hood in Texas, she would stand in her backyard as a little girl, watching the massive Apache helicopters thunder overhead during training exercises. While other kids played with dolls or video games, Sarah built model helicopters and dreamed of the day she would pilot one of those fearsome war machines. Her father, a retired Army sergeant, had always encouraged her dreams, but he also warned her about the challenges ahead. "The military is changing, sweetheart," he would tell her while they worked on airplane models together in the garage. "But change comes slow, and some folks don't like it much." Sarah didn't fully understand what he meant then. She was just a determined teenager with stars in her eyes and aviation fuel in her veins. When Sarah turned 18, she walked into the Army recruitment office with purpose. The recruiter, a middle-aged man with weathered hands and skeptical eyes, looked her up and down before sliding the papers across his desk. "You sure about this, miss? We got plenty of other positions that might be more suitable for someone like you." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "I want to fly Apaches, sir. That's why I'm here." The path to becoming an Apache pilot was brutal for anyone, but Sarah quickly discovered she was fighting two battles. The first was against the incredibly demanding training program that pushed every candidate to their physical and mental limits. The second was against attitudes that had been carved in stone for generations. At flight school, Sarah was one of only 3 women in a class of 42 candidates. The other 2 were training for transport helicopters. Sarah was the only one pursuing attack helicopter certification. On her first day, an instructor looked directly at her and announced to the class, "Gentlemen and lady, welcome to Apache training. Some of you think this is like flying your daddy's Cessna. It ain't. This machine is a weapon of war, and it demands respect, strength, and split-second decisions that can mean life or death for your fellow soldiers." The training was relentless. 16-hour days became normal. Sarah learned to navigate complex weapon systems, master night vision flying, and coordinate with ground troops in simulated combat scenarios. Every mistake was magnified, every success scrutinized. While her male classmates could grab a beer together after training and blow off steam, Sarah often found herself studying alone, knowing she had to be twice as good to be considered half as capable. The physical demands were intense. Apache helicopters are not gentle machines. The vibrations from the rotor system and the G-forces during combat maneuvers tested every pilot's endurance. Sarah spent extra hours in the gym, building the core strength needed to handle the aircraft during extended missions. She learned to manage the complex helmet-mounted display system that allowed pilots to aim weapons simply by looking at targets. 3 months into training, the first major hurdle arrived. It was a night exercise involving multiple aircraft, ground coordination, and live fire training with practice rounds. Sarah had prepared for weeks, memorizing radio frequencies, studying terrain maps, and practicing emergency procedures until they became second nature. But as she climbed into the front seat of the Apache for the exercise, her usual instructor was nowhere to be found. Instead, Captain James Morrison slid into the back seat. Morrison was a legend at the school, a veteran of 2 combat deployments, with a reputation for being harder than coffin nails. He also made no secret of his belief that women had no business in combat aircraft. "Well, well," Morrison said through the intercom as Sarah ran through her pre-flight checklist. "Let's see what you've got, Mitchell. Try not to embarrass yourself too badly." The exercise was designed to test every skill they had learned. Sarah would need to navigate using night vision to a series of waypoints, identify and engage multiple targets, coordinate with ground units, and return to base while managing fuel consumption and potential equipment failures that instructors would simulate. As they lifted off into the black desert night, Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with flying. The Apache responded to her touch like a loyal horse responding to its rider. Through her night vision goggles, the world appeared in ghostly green hues. But Sarah had learned to read this alien landscape like a familiar book. The first waypoint went smoothly. Sarah's navigation was precise, and she reported their position exactly on schedule. But Morrison wasn't making it easy. "Too slow on that radio call, Mitchell. In combat, that delay gets people killed." Sarah acknowledged the criticism without letting it shake her focus. At the second waypoint, the real test began. 3 target vehicles were positioned in a valley, representing enemy positions that needed to be eliminated. Sarah had to identify each target, determine the appropriate weapon system, and engage them while maintaining awareness of simulated friendly forces in the area. One mistake could mean hitting the wrong target in a real combat situation. Sarah steadied the aircraft and began her target acquisition. The Apache's sophisticated targeting system required precise coordination between pilot and gunner, but in training flights like this, the pilot handled both roles. She identified the first target through her helmet display, locked on with the aircraft's chain gun, and fired a practice burst. Direct hit. "Not bad," Morrison grudgingly admitted. "But let's see how you handle some pressure." Without warning, he began simulating multiple system failures. First, the navigation system went down. Then he called out simulated incoming fire that required immediate evasive action. Sarah's training kicked in. She switched to backup navigation, threw the Apache into a hard turn to avoid the simulated threats, and still managed to identify and engage the second target. The helicopter shuddered and bucked under the stress of the maneuvers, but Sarah's hands remained steady on the controls. The third target was the most challenging. It was positioned near a cluster of buildings representing a civilian area. Sarah had to approach from a specific angle to avoid any possibility of collateral damage. As she lined up for the shot, Morrison threw one more curveball. "Engine fire warning, Mitchell. You've got maybe 30 seconds before this bird falls out of the sky. What's your call?" Sarah's mind raced through the emergency procedures. She could abort the mission and head for an emergency landing site, which would be the safe choice. Or she could trust her skills, complete the mission, and then deal with the emergency. In real combat, completing the mission could mean saving the lives of soldiers under fire. She made her decision. Sarah quickly engaged the third target with a perfect shot, then immediately began emergency procedures for the simulated engine fire. She found a suitable landing zone and brought the Apache down smoothly, running through the engine shutdown checklist with mechanical precision. As the rotor blades wound down in the desert silence, Morrison pulled off his helmet and turned to look at Sarah. For the first time since she had known him, something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. "Mitchell," he said slowly, "that was either very brave or very stupid. Time will tell which one." Sarah pulled off her own helmet, her hair damp with sweat, her heart still pounding from the adrenaline. "With respect, sir, I think it was just good flying." Morrison actually smiled at that, the first time she had ever seen him do so. Word of Sarah's performance during the night exercise spread quickly through the training squadron. Some instructors nodded approvingly when she passed them in the hallways. Others seemed to double down on their skepticism, as if her success only proved they needed to make the training even harder. But Sarah had proven something important to herself that night. She could handle the pressure, make life-and-death decisions under stress, and control one of the most sophisticated weapons platforms ever created. The Apache wasn't just a machine to her anymore. It was becoming an extension of her will, her determination, and her skill. As she walked back to her barracks after debriefing, Sarah looked up at the star-filled desert sky and thought about her father's words. Change did come slowly, but sometimes it came one flight at a time, one mission at a time, one person willing to prove that courage and skill mattered more than old assumptions and prejudices. The real test, however, was still ahead. Graduation from flight school was just the beginning. Sarah would soon learn that proving herself in training was nothing compared to proving herself in actual combat, where the stakes were real and the margin for error was 0. 6 months after graduation, Second Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell found herself deployed to Forward Operating Base Falcon in Iraq. The desert landscape looked similar to where she had trained, but everything else was different. The heat was more oppressive, the dust got into everything, and the constant threat of enemy action made every routine flight a potential combat mission. Sarah's unit, the 1st Battalion, 227th Aviation Regiment, flew daily missions supporting ground troops throughout the volatile region. Her first few weeks involved routine patrols and reconnaissance flights, but she could sense the tension among the more experienced pilots. They were polite but distant, clearly waiting to see how she would perform when things got serious. Her aircraft commander was Chief Warrant Officer Mike Torres, a quiet man from New Mexico with over 8 years of Apache experience. Torres had flown in the initial invasion and had seen more combat than most pilots would in a lifetime. He evaluated Sarah with the cold professionalism of someone who knew that trust in combat was earned, not given. "Listen up, Mitchell," Torres told her during their first briefing together. "Out here, I don't care if you're male, female, or a trained monkey. All I care about is whether you can fly, fight, and bring us both home alive. Everything else is just noise." Sarah appreciated his directness. Torres might not warm up to her immediately, but at least he was giving her a fair chance to prove herself. Their daily missions included convoy escort, close air support for infantry units, and reconnaissance over suspected insurgent areas. Sarah quickly adapted to the rhythm of combat operations. Unlike training, where scenarios were carefully controlled, real combat was chaotic and unpredictable. Radio chatter filled with urgent voices, weather changes that forced last-minute route adjustments, and the constant awareness that somewhere below, people were actively trying to kill them. Sarah's skills improved rapidly under the pressure of real operations. She learned to read the landscape for signs of improvised explosive devices, coordinate with forward air controllers who were often under fire while giving directions, and manage the complex weapon systems while flying in formation with other aircraft. But despite her growing competence, Sarah could feel the skepticism from some quarters. During mission briefings, certain senior officers would address most of their tactical instructions to Torres, as if Sarah were just along for the ride. In the mess hall, conversations would sometimes stop when she approached, then resume with careful politeness that felt more isolating than open hostility. The turning point came on a sweltering Tuesday morning in July. Sarah and Torres were part of a 4-aircraft mission supporting a joint Army and Marine operation in a contested area east of Baghdad. Intelligence reports indicated a significant insurgent presence in several compounds, and ground forces were planning a coordinated assault to capture or eliminate high-value targets. The mission briefing was more detailed than usual. Major Harrison, the squadron commander, spread aerial photographs across the table and outlined the plan. Ground units would approach from 3 directions, while the Apache flight provided overwatch and close air support. "This is a big one, people," Harrison said, his usual calm demeanor more serious than normal. "Intelligence suggests we're looking at coordinated resistance with possible anti-aircraft weapons. Everyone stays sharp, everyone comes home." Sarah studied the photographs intently, memorizing the layout of buildings, potential escape routes, and areas where civilians might be present. She noticed Torres watching her preparation with approval. Whatever doubts he might have had about her initially, her thorough approach to mission planning had earned his respect. As they walked to their aircraft, Torres spoke quietly to Sarah. "Today feels different. My gut tells me we're walking into something bigger than the briefing suggested. Watch for anything that doesn't look right, and trust your instincts. Sometimes the book goes out the window, and you have to fly by feel." The flight to the target area was routine, 4 Apaches in formation flying low over the desert landscape. Sarah's aircraft was designated as the primary close air support platform, meaning they would be closest to the ground action and most likely to engage targets. Torres handled the radios while Sarah focused on flying and familiarizing herself with the target area. As they approached the objective, the radio traffic intensified. Ground units reported they were taking fire from multiple positions. The neat tactical plan from the briefing was already falling apart as insurgents engaged from unexpected positions and began moving between compounds in ways that intelligence hadn't predicted. "Apache flight. This is ground control," came the urgent voice over the radio. "We've got troops in contact, multiple casualty reports. We need immediate fire support on Compound Charlie, over." Sarah looked down at the target area through her helmet display. Compound. Charlie was a cluster of buildings surrounded by a low wall. She could see muzzle flashes from several windows and the distinctive dust clouds that indicated mortar fire. American soldiers were pinned down in an open area with minimal cover, unable to advance or retreat safely. Torres quickly coordinated with the other aircraft in their flight, establishing attack patterns that would allow them to engage the compound without risking friendly fire. But as they began their first attack run, the situation deteriorated rapidly. "Apache 2-1, be advised we're seeing possible SAM sites," came the voice of their flight leader. "Anti-aircraft missiles, sophisticated stuff. This isn't the usual small arms fire." Sarah felt her heart rate spike, but her hands remained steady on the controls. Surface-to-air missiles were every helicopter pilot's nightmare. Unlike bullets or rocket-propelled grenades, which required close range and good timing, missiles could reach out and destroy aircraft from miles away. As if summoned by the warning, Sarah saw the telltale smoke trail of a launched missile rising from a building near Compound Charlie. The missile was heading directly for Apache 3, the aircraft flying to their right. "Missile launch! Missile launch!" Torres shouted over the radio. "Apache 3, break right! Break right!" Sarah watched in horror as the missile tracked toward their wingman. Apache 3's pilot threw his aircraft into a violent evasive maneuver, dropping chaff and flares to confuse the missile's guidance system. The missile missed by mere yards, exploding harmlessly in the desert beyond. But the message was clear. This wasn't a routine close air support mission anymore. They were facing organized resistance with military-grade weapons, and the stakes had just gone from dangerous to potentially catastrophic. "Apache flight, this is ground control," came another urgent radio call. "Troops are taking heavy casualties. We need that fire support now, or we're going to have to withdraw." Sarah looked at Torres, knowing they were both thinking the same thing. The missile launch site was still active, meaning any aircraft that approached the target area was flying into a potential death trap. But American soldiers were dying on the ground below, and withdrawing air support might mean even more casualties. "Your call, Mitchell," Torres said quietly over the intercom. "Your pilot in command for this engagement." It was a moment that would define not just the mission, but Sarah's entire career. She could play it safe, stand off at maximum range, and provide whatever support was possible from a distance. It would be the tactically sound decision that most experienced pilots would make. Or she could take the Apache in close, accept the risks, and give the ground troops the precise fire support they desperately needed. Sarah made her decision with the same calm determination she had shown during training. "We're going in close," she said, "but we do it smart." She began a series of rapid, unpredictable flight patterns that would make it difficult for missile operators to track her aircraft. Instead of flying straight lines that missiles could easily intercept, Sarah kept the Apache moving in 3 dimensions, using terrain features and buildings to mask their approach. At the same time, she coordinated with the other aircraft in their flight to suppress the missile sites with their own weapons. It was an incredibly complex aerial ballet, with 4 aircraft maneuvering in a confined area while avoiding each other, enemy fire, and the friendly forces they were trying to protect. As they closed on Compound Charlie, Sarah could see the situation on the ground clearly. American soldiers were scattered behind minimal cover, unable to move because of sustained fire from the compound. Several wounded soldiers were visible in the open, unable to reach medical aid because of the intense enemy fire. Sarah lined up her first attack run with surgical precision. Using the Apache's 30mm chain gun, she placed precise bursts of fire through the windows where muzzle flashes indicated enemy positions. The massive rounds tore through the building's walls, silencing the weapons that had been pinning down the American troops. But as she completed the attack run, another missile launch appeared from a different location. This one was aimed directly at her aircraft. Sarah saw the missile's smoke trail and reacted instantly. She threw the Apache into a steep dive toward the ground, using the buildings of the compound to break the missile's lock. The missile streaked overhead, missing them by what felt like inches. "Nice flying," Torres said with characteristic understatement. "But we're not done yet." More enemy positions had revealed themselves during the attack, and the ground troops were still taking fire from multiple directions. Sarah realized that conventional attack patterns wouldn't work in this situation. The enemy was too well positioned, and the missile threat made standard tactics suicidal. She made a decision that went against everything she had been taught in flight school. Instead of maintaining safe distance and altitude, Sarah brought the Apache down to rooftop level, using the buildings themselves as cover while engaging targets at point-blank range. It was incredibly dangerous flying, requiring split-second reactions and perfect coordination with Torres, who was managing target acquisition and weapon systems while Sarah concentrated on keeping them alive. But the unconventional tactics worked. By staying low and using unpredictable flight paths, Sarah was able to engage enemy positions with devastating accuracy while avoiding the missile sites that were positioned to target aircraft at normal engagement altitudes. One by one, the enemy firing positions fell silent under the Apache's precise fire. Sarah's flying was so accurate that she was able to eliminate threats within yards of friendly positions without risking American lives. After what felt like hours, but was actually only 12 minutes. The radio crackled with a different tone. "Apache 2-1, this is ground control. All enemy positions neutralized. Outstanding work up there. You just saved a lot of lives." As Sarah pulled the Apache up to a safer altitude, she realized she was shaking slightly from adrenaline. But she had done it. She had flown through one of the most dangerous situations an Apache pilot could face and emerged successful. Torres turned to look at her with an expression of unmistakable respect. "Mitchell," he said, "that was some of the best combat flying I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot." When they returned to base, word of the mission spread quickly through the squadron. The same officers who had been skeptical of Sarah's presence now looked at her with new eyes. She had proven herself not just competent, but exceptional, under the most demanding circumstances imaginable. But for Sarah, the real validation came from the message they received that evening. All American personnel from the ground operation had been successfully evacuated, including the wounded. Her flying had made the difference between a successful mission and a potential disaster. As she sat in her quarters that night, cleaning her flight gear and preparing for the next day's missions, Sarah reflected on how much had changed. She was no longer the untested pilot trying to prove she belonged. She was a combat veteran who had earned her place through skill, courage, and determination. The Apache that had once seemed like an impossible dream was now her trusted partner in the most dangerous skies in the world. And tomorrow, she would climb back into the cockpit, ready for whatever challenges awaited. The mission that would define Sarah Mitchell's legacy began like any other routine patrol. 3 months after her combat debut, she had established herself as one of the squadron's most reliable pilots. The skepticism that once followed her had been replaced by respect, and her aircraft commander Torres had become not just a partner, but a trusted friend who would follow her into any situation. On this particular morning, the briefing seemed straightforward. Sarah and Torres would provide reconnaissance and security for a convoy moving medical supplies to a remote outpost near the Syrian border. Intelligence reports suggested minimal enemy activity in the area, and the mission was classified as low risk. But Captain Rebecca Hayes, the new intelligence officer, had a worried expression as she concluded the briefing. "Something feels off about this one," she told the assembled pilots. "We're not seeing the usual communication patterns from insurgent groups in that sector. It's too quiet." Major Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "Trust your instincts out there, people. Sometimes the absence of intelligence is intelligence itself." As Sarah performed her pre-flight inspection of the Apache, she noticed Torres was unusually quiet. When she asked about it, he shrugged. "8 years of flying in this sandbox, and I've learned to listen when things don't feel right. Hayes is sharp, and if she's worried, we should be worried too." The convoy consisted of 12 vehicles carrying medical supplies and a security escort. As Sarah's Apache took position overhead, she could see the dust cloud trailing behind the trucks as they made their way along the desert road. The terrain was challenging, with rocky outcroppings and deep ravines that provided perfect hiding spots for potential ambushes. 30 minutes into the escort mission, Sarah's instincts began sending warning signals. The road ahead curved through a narrow valley with high ground on both sides. It was a textbook ambush site, and something about the way shadows fell across the rocks didn't look natural. "Torres, check out those rock formations at 2 o'clock, she said, adjusting the Apache's position for a better view. "Those shadows look wrong." Torres activated the aircraft's advanced targeting system and focused on the area Sarah had identified. After a moment, he confirmed her suspicion. "Camouflage positions. Multiple fighting positions with clear fields of fire on the convoy route. This isn't a random encounter. Someone planned this." Before they could warn the convoy, the attack began. Explosions erupted along the road as improvised explosive devices detonated under the lead vehicles. Immediately afterward, coordinated fire erupted from the concealed positions Sarah had spotted. The convoy was trapped in a carefully orchestrated ambush with no escape route. "Apache 2-1 to ground control," Torres radioed urgently. "Convoy under attack. Multiple casualties requesting immediate backup." But the response that came back chilled both pilots. "Apache 2-1, be advised all available assets are committed to ongoing operations. You are the only air support available for the next 30 minutes. Sarah looked down at the chaos below. Several convoy vehicles were destroyed or disabled, and she could see soldiers taking cover wherever they could find it. The wounded were trapped in the open, unable to reach medical aid because of the sustained enemy fire from multiple directions. 30 minutes, Torres said grimly. "At the rate they're taking casualties down there won't be anyone left to rescue in 30 minutes. Sarah studied the tactical situation with the analytical mind that had made her such an effective pilot. The ambush was sophisticated, with coordinated fire from at least 6 different positions arranged to create overlapping fields of fire. Any attempt to suppress one position would expose the Apache to fire from the others. But as she analyzed the enemy positions, Sarah noticed something that gave her an idea. The ambush sites were positioned to target vehicles on the road, but they weren't optimally placed to defend against an attack from above and behind. If she could get the Apache into position on the far side of the valley, she might be able to attack the positions from their blind spots. The problem was getting there. The direct route would take them through the kill zone where multiple anti-aircraft weapons were positioned. The alternative was flying around the valley, which would take precious time while soldiers died below. Sarah made a decision that would have been considered reckless by any standard tactical manual. Instead of flying around the ambush or standing off at maximum range, she decided to fly directly through the valley at extremely low altitude, using the terrain to mask her approach until she was in position to attack from the enemy's rear. "Torres, I'm going to take us through the valley, low and fast, using terrain masking. Can you handle target acquisition while I focus on flying?" Torres looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Mitchell, that's suicide flying. One mistake, one lucky shot, and we're a smoking hole in the ground." "Maybe," Sarah replied, already beginning her descent toward the valley floor. But those soldiers down there don't have 30 minutes. We're their only chance. What followed was some of the most demanding flying of Sarah's career. She brought the Apache down to barely 50 feet above the rocky terrain, threading the massive helicopter between boulders and through narrow passages that seemed impossible for an aircraft of that size. The rotor wash kicked up huge clouds of dust and debris, reducing visibility to almost zero, but Sarah flew by instinct and her intimate knowledge of how the Apache handled. Torres worked frantically with the targeting systems, identifying enemy positions and preparing weapons for engagement while bracing himself against the violent maneuvering required to navigate the treacherous terrain. Position 1, 12 o'clock, range 800 meters, he called out as they approached their first target. Sarah pulled the Apache up just enough to clear a rocky ridge, and suddenly they were behind the first enemy position. The insurgents, focused on the convoy below, never saw the attack helicopter until Torres opened fire with the 30mm chain gun. The position was silenced in seconds, but their presence was now known to the other ambush sites. As Sarah maneuvered toward the second position, tracer rounds began streaking past the cockpit. Anti-aircraft fire erupted from multiple directions, turning the narrow valley into a death trap. Sarah's response was to fly even lower and faster, using every fold in the terrain to break enemy targeting solutions. She flew the Apache like it was a fighter jet instead of a helicopter, pulling G-forces that stressed both the aircraft and its occupants to their limits. Position 2, 9 o'clock, range 600 meters, Torres called out, somehow maintaining his focus despite the chaos around them. Sarah banked the Apache hard left, presenting Torres with a clear shot at the second ambush site. More precise fire eliminated another threat, but as they engaged the third position, disaster struck. A rocket-propelled grenade launched from a concealed site impacted just meters from the Apache's tail rotor. The explosion sent shrapnel through the aircraft's systems, and warning lights immediately began flashing throughout the cockpit. "We're hit," Torres reported with professional calm. "Hydraulic systems compromised, electrical problems, and I think we lost some tail rotor authority." Sarah could feel the difference immediately. The Apache, which had been responding to her commands like an extension of her own body, now felt sluggish and unpredictable. Flying was becoming increasingly difficult, and she knew they were operating on borrowed time. Any reasonable pilot would have declared an emergency and headed for the nearest landing zone. But Sarah looked down at the convoy where American soldiers were still trapped under fire and made a different choice. "How many more positions?" she asked Torres. "3 confirmed, possibly more. Then we finish the job." What followed was flying that would become legendary among Apache pilots. Despite flying a damaged aircraft that was becoming more difficult to control by the minute, Sarah continued attacking enemy positions with surgical precision. She compensated for the hydraulic problems by using raw physical strength to control the aircraft and adapted to the electrical failures by flying on backup instruments. Torres, meanwhile, managed the weapon systems while also monitoring their deteriorating aircraft condition. His target acquisition remained flawless despite the increasingly violent maneuvering required to keep them alive. One by one, the remaining ambush positions fell silent under their attack. Each engagement required Sarah to put the damaged Apache into positions and attitudes that pushed both machine and pilot beyond their normal limits. But her unconventional tactics continued to work, allowing them to eliminate threats while avoiding the worst of the enemy fire. When the last confirmed enemy position was destroyed, Torres looked at the instrument panel with disbelief. "Mitchell, I don't know how this bird is still flying. We've got warning lights that I didn't even know existed." Sarah was exhausted from the physical effort of controlling the damaged aircraft, but she wasn't done yet. "Ground control. This is Apache 2-1. Primary threats neutralized, but we need medical evacuation for casualties. What's our backup situation?" The response was devastating. "Apache 2-1. Nearest medical helicopter is 45 minutes out. Critical casualties may not survive that long. Sarah looked down at the convoy, where medics were working frantically to save wounded soldiers. She could see at least 3 soldiers who appeared to be critically injured. 45 minutes might as well be 45 hours. She made her final decision of the day, one that would cement her reputation forever. Torres, how much weight can we carry with our current damage? Torres quickly calculated their reduced capabilities. Maybe 2 litters and medical personnel. Why? Because we're going to be the medical evacuation. Torres stared at her. Sarah, this bird is barely flyable as it is. Adding weight and trying to land in an unsecured zone with damaged systems, it's impossible. Sarah was already beginning her descent toward the convoy's position. Impossible just means nobody's figured out how to do it yet. The landing was a masterpiece of pilot skill and determination. Sarah brought the damaged Apache down in a cloud of dust and debris, compensating for the compromised flight controls through sheer force of will. The aircraft touched down hard but intact, immediately surrounded by medics and security personnel. Within minutes, the most critically wounded soldiers were loaded aboard the Apache, along with a flight medic who would monitor their condition during the flight to the nearest field hospital. The additional weight and the medical equipment created a dangerous shift in the aircraft's center of gravity, making an already challenging flight even more precarious. Sarah's takeoff was equally impressive, coaxing the overloaded and damaged aircraft into the air through a combination of skill, determination, and what could only be described as pilot magic. The flight to the field hospital pushed both Sarah and the Apache to their absolute limits, but they delivered their precious cargo safely. When Sarah finally landed at the medical facility and shut down the battered Apache, she had to be helped from the cockpit. The physical and mental strain of the mission had pushed her beyond exhaustion. But all 3 critical casualties survived and would eventually make full recoveries. The investigation that followed revealed the true scope of what Sarah had accomplished. The ambush had been planned and executed by a sophisticated insurgent cell using military-grade weapons and tactics. Any conventional response would have resulted in significant casualties among the convoy personnel. Sarah's unconventional tactics, combined with her exceptional flying skills, had not only neutralized a major threat, but had also saved the lives of soldiers who would have died without immediate medical evacuation. The mission became a case study in tactical innovation and pilot heroism. More importantly, Sarah's actions that day shattered the last vestiges of doubt about women in combat roles. Her performance under pressure, her tactical decision-making, and her willingness to risk everything to save fellow soldiers proved conclusively that courage, skill, and determination knew no gender boundaries. When Sarah was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for her actions that day, she stood before an audience that included many of the same people who had once questioned her place in Apache cockpits. But the skepticism was gone, replaced by respect that had been earned through fire and proven in combat. In her acceptance speech, Sarah was characteristically modest. "This medal doesn't belong to me alone," she said. "It belongs to every person who believed that what matters in the cockpit isn't whether you're male or female, but whether you have the skill and courage to do what needs to be done. Today, I hope we prove that courage has no gender." Captain Torres, who had been promoted and assigned as Sarah's permanent co-pilot, perhaps said it best in his own after-action report. "Lieutenant Mitchell didn't just prove that women can fly Apaches in combat. She proved that she's one of the finest combat pilots I've ever flown with, period. Anyone who still questions women in combat roles after this mission is questioning their own prejudices, not her abilities." Sarah continued flying combat missions for the remainder of her deployment, but the Valley Ambush mission remained the defining moment of her career. She had not only overcome the barriers placed in her path, but had rewritten the expectations for what was possible in Apache combat operations. Years later, when young female pilots asked her for advice about facing skepticism and prejudice, Sarah would tell them the same thing her father had told her years earlier. Change comes slowly, but it does come. Sometimes it comes one mission at a time, one flight at a time, one person at a time, willing to prove that skill and courage matter more than old assumptions. The Apache helicopter that Sarah flew that day was eventually repaired and returned to service, but it carried new markings. Small symbols painted near the cockpit commemorated the successful mission and the lives saved. But more importantly, it carried the legacy of a pilot who proved that the sky belongs to anyone brave enough and skilled enough to claim it.